3 weeks earlier. Vivian Sterling would never forget the moment she opened that ivory envelope. Her hands trembled as her eyes scanned the words written in golden ink. Mr. Harrison Blackwell requests your presence for a special dinner at Blackwell Mansion. She screamed so loudly that the neighbors banged on the wall of the tiny apartment she shared with her grandmother. This could only mean one thing. The Blackwell patriarch would finally publicly recognize her work at the charitable foundation. Maybe even promote her. Maybe. Vivi! Her grandmother Dorothy's voice brought her back. The phone has been ringing for 5 minutes. Present. Morning of the dinner. You need to come pick up your grandmother now. She fell and broke her ankle. Vivian felt the world spin. The phone nearly slipped from her sweaty hands as the nurse on the other end of the line continued talking about procedures and x-rays. Her grandmother Dorothy, the only family she had, was in the hospital, and she had exactly 6 hours until the most important dinner of her life. I'm on my way, she said, already grabbing her keys. The apartment in Brooklyn seemed smaller than ever as she rushed from one side to the other, throwing things into her bag. The navy blue dress she'd bought at a thrift store, the only one presentable enough for Blackwell Mansion, was still hanging on the closet door, with the price tag she hadn't had the courage to remove. $37. A fortune for someone who lived paycheck to paycheck working as an assistant at the Blackwell Foundation. At the hospital, she found Dorothy with her foot in a cast and a stubborn smile on her wrinkled face. Don't you dare cancel that dinner because of me, Vivian Rose Sterling, the elderly woman said before her granddaughter could even open her mouth. I didn't raise you to waste opportunities. Grandma, you broke your ankle. So what? I've broken worse things. Dorothy squeezed her hand with surprising strength. You worked 3 years for this moment. 3 years smiling at horrible people, organizing events without receiving credit, and doing the work of 5 people for half a salary. If Harrison Blackwell finally wants to recognize that, you're going to be there. Vivian bit her lip. Her grandmother didn't know everything. She didn't know that Vivian also secretly dreamed of impressing the old patriarch enough to get a scholarship to finish the college degree she'd abandoned at 20. She didn't know that every penny saved went into a fund that barely grew while bills piled up. What if I make a fool of myself? She murmured. I don't know how to use half the silverware they put on the table. Dorothy laughed, the sound echoing through the hospital room. Sweetheart, you're smarter and harder working than any of those spoiled rich people. Besides, she winked, start from the outside in. Works every time. 5 hours later, Vivian stood before the cracked bathroom mirror, trying to tame the reddish-brown curls that insisted on having a life of their own. The navy blue dress hugged her curves in a way that made her feel almost elegant. Almost. Her phone beeped. A message from an unknown number. Ms. Sterling, the driver awaits you at your building's entrance. Mr. Blackwell insists you arrive in comfort. Martha, personal assistant. Vivian peeked through the window and nearly choked. A black Bentley gleamed under the streetlight like an obscenely expensive jewel. This is it, she whispered to her reflection. Don't trip, don't spill wine on anyone, and for God's sake, don't talk too much. She had no idea that in less than 2 hours, she would be covered in champagne from head to toe, being called a gold digger by the cruelest woman in Connecticut. And she certainly couldn't imagine that the man responsible for turning her life upside down would be watching her from the moment she crossed the mansion's threshold, with a look that mixed surprise, irritation, and something far more dangerous. Something that looked like fascination. The Bentley glided through wrought iron gates that probably cost more than Vivian would earn in a lifetime. She pressed her face against the window like a child at a candy store, watching as Blackwell Mansion emerged from behind a curtain of ancient oak trees. Mansion was an understatement. The estate looked like something ripped from a period drama. 3 stories of gray stone, climbing ivy, and windows that glittered like dozens of watchful eyes. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Porsches, Mercedes, a Ferrari so red it seemed to bleed into the evening light. Vivian's stomach twisted. She glanced down at her thrift store dress and suddenly felt like a pigeon who'd accidentally wandered into a gathering of peacocks. "You belong here," she told herself. "You worked for this." The driver opened her door with a polished smile. "Ms. Sterling, welcome to Blackwell Mansion." Her heels, borrowed from her grandmother, half a size too small, clicked against the marble steps as she approached the entrance. A butler in a pristine uniform opened the double doors before she could even reach for the handle. "Ms. Sterling," he said, as if he'd been expecting her all his life. "Mr. Blackwell is delighted you could attend. Please follow me." The foyer alone could have swallowed her entire apartment building. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow fragments across walls adorned with paintings that probably belonged in museums. Vivienne caught herself holding her breath, terrified that even her exhale might break something expensive. Voices and laughter drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, the kind of laughter that sounded like champagne bubbles and old money. "The guests are gathered in the east drawing room," the butler explained. "Dinner will be served in approximately 40 minutes. Vivienne nodded, not trusting her voice. She followed him through a labyrinth of hallways until they reached an arched doorway, beyond which lay a room filled with people who looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. And then she saw him. He stood by the fireplace, one hand casually tucked in his pocket, the other holding a glass of whiskey. Tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his temples and a jaw sharp enough to cut glass. His charcoal suit fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body by angels with very expensive taste, but it was his eyes that stopped her breathing. Steel gray, intense, and currently fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, annoyance, something else. For 3 full seconds, the world shrank to just the two of them. Vivienne felt heat crawl up her neck, her chest, her cheeks. She didn't know who he was, but her body apparently did, because every nerve ending was suddenly standing at attention. Then a voice shattered the moment like a hammer through glass. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in." A woman materialized at the man's side, tall, blonde, and so surgically perfect she looked almost artificial. Her silver dress cost more than Vivienne's annual rent. That much was obvious. Diamonds dripped from her ears and throat like frozen tears. "Excuse me?" Vivienne said, her voice steadier than she felt. The blonde smiled, but it didn't reach her ice-blue eyes. "I said how lovely that the help could join us tonight. I'm Cordelia Hampton, soon to be Cordelia Blackwell." She placed a possessive hand on the gray-eyed man's arm. "This is my fiancé, Dominic. Dominic Blackwell." The name hit Vivienne like a splash of cold water. Harrison Blackwell's only son. Heir to the Blackwell Empire, and apparently engaged to a woman who looked at Vivienne like she was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of her designer heel. "I'm not help," Vivienne said, forcing a polite smile. "Oh, we know who you are." A new voice joined the conversation, older and sharper. A woman in her 60s approached, draped in emerald silk, her silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. "You're the little charity case Harrison insists on parading around. The scholarship project." "Mother," Dominic said quietly, but the warning in his voice was unmistakable. So this was Genevieve Blackwell, the matriarch, the woman whose reputation for cruelty was whispered about, even among the Foundation's staff. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Blackwell," Vivienne said, keeping her chin high. "Mr. Blackwell has been incredibly supportive of my work with the Foundation." Genevieve's smile was a knife wrapped in velvet. "Yes, Harrison does have a weakness for strays." The word landed like a slap. Vivienne felt her composure crack, just a little. She opened her mouth to respond, though God knew what she would have said, when a warm, booming voice cut through the tension. "Vivienne!" Harrison Blackwell crossed the room with his arms open wide, his kind face beaming. At 72, he still had the energy of a man half his age, with white hair, warm brown eyes, and the sort of genuine smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. "I'm so glad you could make it," he said, clasping her hands. "I've been telling everyone about the work you've done with the literacy program. Absolutely remarkable." Over his shoulder, Vivian caught Genevieve's expression souring like milk in the sun. Cordelia whispered something to Dominic, who hadn't stopped staring at Vivian with that unreadable intensity. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," Vivian said, genuinely touched. "It means so much to hear that. None of that Mr. Blackwell nonsense tonight. Call me Harrison." He winked. "Now let's get you a drink. You'll need it to survive this crowd." He led her toward the bar, and Vivian allowed herself a small breath of relief. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe— "Careful!" Cordelia's voice floated after her, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Dominic, darling, you might want to hide your wallet. I hear the help can be quite grabby." Scattered laughter rippled through the room. Vivian's face burned, but she kept walking, kept breathing. She would not give them the satisfaction. What she didn't see was Dominic's jaw tightening, his gray eyes flashing with something that looked almost like anger, though not at her. And she certainly didn't see the way his gaze followed her across the room, lingering on the graceful line of her neck, the proud set of her shoulders, the fire in her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide. Dominic Blackwell had met hundreds of women, heiresses, models, actresses, all eager to impress him, to charm him, to trap him. But none of them had ever walked into his mother's lion den with a $37 dress and looked at Cordelia Hampton like she was something to be pitied rather than feared. "Who the hell are you, Vivian Sterling?" He took a long sip of whiskey. He intended to find out. Dinner was announced at precisely 8 o'clock. The dining room was a cathedral of excess, a table long enough to land a small aircraft, set with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter under the weight of a harsh glance. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight like captured stars. Fresh peonies exploded from silver vases at precise intervals. Vivian had been placed, strategically, she suspected, at the far end of the table, surrounded by elderly guests who seemed more interested in their soup than conversation. Far from Harrison. Far from anyone who might actually speak to her. But not far enough from them. Cordelia sat directly across from her, with Dominic to her right and Genevieve to her left. A perfect firing squad. "So," Cordelia said, delicately spooning her butternut squash bisque, "Vivian, tell us about your family. What does your father do?" The question was a loaded weapon, and they both knew it. "My father passed away when I was 7, Vivian replied evenly. "My mother shortly after. I was raised by my grandmother." "Oh, how tragic." Cordelia's voice dripped with false sympathy. "And your grandmother, what does she do?" "She's retired. She was a seamstress for 40 years. A seamstress." Genevieve repeated the word like it tasted foul. "How quaint." Vivian set down her spoon with careful precision. "She made wedding dresses. Beautiful ones. She used to say that every stitch was a wish for the bride's happiness." She met Genevieve's cold gaze. "I've always thought there was something noble about creating beauty with your own hands." A muscle twitched in Genevieve's jaw. From the corner of her eye, Vivian caught Dominic watching her again. He hadn't spoken a single word to her all evening, but his attention was a physical thing. Heavy, persistent, unnerving. "Stop looking at me like that," she wanted to snap. "Your fiancé is right there." The second course arrived, seared scallops with truffle foam. Vivian had never eaten a truffle in her life, and wasn't entirely sure she was supposed to eat the foam or just admire it. "Outside in," she reminded herself. "Start from the outside." She reached for the correct fork, thank God, and had just brought the first scallop to her lips when Cordelia struck again. "I hear you're hoping for a scholarship," she said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "To finish your little degree." "What was it? Community college?" "Columbia," Vivian corrected quietly. "I had to leave during my junior year. Financial reasons." "Columbia!" Cordelia pressed a hand to her chest in mock surprise. "How ambitious for someone of your Background. And now you're hoping my future father-in-law will pay for it? She laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. I suppose that's one way to climb the ladder. Heat flooded Vivian's face. I'm not hoping for anything I haven't earned. Earned? Genevieve's eyebrow arched. My dear girl, people like you don't earn things. You take them. You charm your way into places you don't belong and hope no one notices the dirt under your fingernails. The words landed like blows, each one more vicious than the last. Vivian's hands trembled beneath the table. She wanted to stand up, to walk out, to tell these horrible women exactly what she thought of them. But she could feel Harrison's eyes on her from the head of the table, full of warmth and expectation, and she wouldn't, let him down. I think, Dominic said suddenly, his deep voice cutting through the tension, that's quite enough. Everyone turned to look at him. Darling, Cordelia cooed, placing her hand over his. We're just having a bit of fun, getting to know your father's little project. She's not a project. His grey eyes were storm clouds now, dark and dangerous. She's a guest, treat her like one. Silence rippled down the table. Genevieve's face went rigid. Cordelia's smile turned brittle. Vivian didn't know what to feel, grateful, embarrassed, confused. Dominic Blackwell had barely acknowledged her existence all night, and now he was defending her. Don't, she thought fiercely. Don't you dare make me feel something for you. Cordelia recovered quickly, her laugh light and dismissive. Of course, darling. I didn't mean any offense. She picked up her wineglass and rose gracefully. Actually, I'd like to propose a toast to Harrison for his endless generosity toward those less fortunate. She began to move around the table, champagne glass in hand, smiling at guests as she passed. Vivian watched her approach, a knot forming in her stomach. Cordelia stopped right behind Vivian's chair. And to Vivian, she continued, her voice sweet as arsenic, for reminding us all how lucky we are. What happened next would replay in Vivian's mind for weeks. Cordelia's hand slipped. An entire glass of Dom Perignon cascaded over Vivian's head, soaking her hair, her face, her dress. The cold shock of it stole her breath. Champagne dripped from her eyelashes, her chin pooling in her lap. Gasps erupted around the table. "Oh my God!" Cordelia cried, her hand flying to her mouth. "I'm so sorry! How clumsy of me!" But her eyes told a different story. They glittered with triumph, with malice, with the satisfaction of a predator who'd finally cornered her prey. Vivian sat frozen. Champagne soaked through her grandmother's borrowed shoes, ruining them. Her $37 dress clung to her skin, and she had never felt so small. Laughter broke out somewhere down the table. Someone muttered "gold digger," just loud enough to hear. And then she saw Genevieve smile. Something inside Vivian cracked. She stood up slowly, champagne still dripping from her hair, and looked directly at Cordelia. The room went silent. "You know," Vivian said, her voice quiet but steady. "My grandmother once told me that you can tell everything about a person by how they treat those they think are beneath them." Cordelia's smile faltered. "So, thank you, Miss Hampton." Vivian held her gaze. "You've told me everything I need to know." She turned and walked out of the dining room with her head held high, leaving a trail of champagne drops behind her like fallen stars. She didn't see Harrison's face, twisted with fury. She didn't see Genevieve's smile finally cracking. And she didn't see Dominic rise from his chair and follow her. Vivian made it to the garden before the tears came. She stumbled down the stone steps, past manicured hedges and marble fountains, until she found a bench hidden beneath a canopy of wisteria. The night air was cool against her champagne-soaked skin, and she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "Don't cry. Don't you dare cry." But the tears came anyway, hot, angry, humiliated. She wiped them away furiously, smearing mascara across her cheeks. 3 years. 3 years of smiling through condescension, of working twice as hard for half the recognition, of believing that if she just tried hard enough, she could belong in their world. What a fool she'd been. "You're going to catch pneumonia out here." Vivian's head snapped up. Dominic Blackwell stood at the edge of the wisteria canopy, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. He'd removed his jacket at some point, and his white dress shirt glowed like a ghost in the darkness. "Go away," she said, her voice raw. He didn't move. "You're soaking wet." Astute observation. Did they teach you that at Yale, or was it Harvard? A muscle twitched at the corner of his mouth. Almost a smile. Princeton, actually. Of course it was. She turned away from him, staring at the fountain where stone cherubs spat water into a basin. "Shouldn't you be inside, comforting your fiancé?" She seemed very distressed by her accident. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then she heard his footsteps on the gravel path, and suddenly his jacket was draped over her shoulders, warm, heavy, smelling of sandalwood and something darker. Whiskey, maybe. "I'm not here to defend Cordelia," he said, settling onto the bench beside her. Not too close, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the fountain, his jaw tight, his gray eyes distant. "Because that was the bravest thing I've seen in years," he finally said. Vivian blinked. "What?" "The way you stood up to her. To my mother." He turned to look at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Most people cower. They laugh along, desperate to stay in their good graces. But you looked Cordelia in the eye and made her feel small. The ghost of a smile returned. "I don't think anyone's ever done that before." Vivian didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Dominic Blackwell she'd expected, the arrogant heir, the cold prince of Manhattan society. This man seemed almost human. "I didn't do it to be brave," she said quietly. "I did it because I was humiliated and angry, and I couldn't sit there for one more second." "That's what bravery is." He held her gaze. "Doing the hard thing when you're terrified." The air between them felt charged, electric. Vivian became acutely aware of how close he was, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the slight stubble along his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. "Stop it," she told herself. "He's engaged. He's a Blackwell. He's everything you should stay away from." She stood up abruptly, his jacket sliding from her shoulders. "I should go." She picked up the jacket, held it out to him. "Thank you for this, but I don't need your pity." He rose too, but he didn't take the jacket. "It's not pity." "Then what is it?" Dominic stepped closer, too close. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice low and rough. "I haven't figured that out yet." For a moment, one breathless, infinite moment, she thought he might kiss her. His eyes dropped to her lips, and she saw his hands clench at his sides as if he was fighting some internal battle. Then headlights swept across the garden. They both turned to see a sleek black car pulling up to the mansion's side entrance. A uniformed driver stepped out, waiting. "I called you a car," Dominic said, his voice carefully neutral now. "To take you home." Vivian felt something collapse inside her chest. Of course. He wasn't here to rescue her. He was here to get rid of her, to clean up the mess his fiancé had made. "How thoughtful," she said coldly, shoving the jacket into his hands. "Please, thank your father for the invitation. It was educational." She started toward the car, but his voice stopped her. "Vivienne." She turned. He stood in the moonlight with his jacket clutched in his hands, looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "For what it's worth," he said. "You were the most interesting person in that room." She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Interesting enough to humiliate." Not interesting enough to defend publicly. She shook her head. Good night, Mr. Blackwell. She climbed into the car without looking back. But as the Bentley pulled away from Blackwell Mansion, she allowed herself one glance in the rearview mirror. Dominic still stood in the garden, watching her leave. And even from this distance, she could see that his hands were shaking. The ride back to Brooklyn took 45 minutes. Vivian spent every single one of them replaying the evening in her mind, the humiliation, the cruelty, and that moment in the garden when Dominic Blackwell had looked at her like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. Forget him, she told herself. Forget all of them. Her phone buzzed. A text from her grandmother. How was it? Did you dazzle them? Vivian stared at the message, her eyes burning. It was fine, she typed back. Tell you everything tomorrow. Love you. She leaned her head against the window and watched the city lights blur past. She didn't know that, at that very moment, Harrison Blackwell was in his study, informing Cordelia and Genevieve that their behavior was unacceptable and beneath this family. She didn't know that Cordelia was crying theatrical tears while Genevieve seethed in silence. And she didn't know that Dominic was standing at his bedroom window, staring at the empty driveway, unable to get the image of champagne dripping from her hair out of his mind, unable to forget the fire in her eyes, unable to stop wondering what might have happened if he'd kissed her when he had the chance. 3 days passed. 3 days of Vivian throwing herself into work, arriving early and staying late, burying herself in spreadsheets and donor reports until her eyes burned. 3 days of dodging questions from coworkers who'd heard whispers about the incident at the mansion. 3 days of pretending she didn't flinch every time her office door opened. She was fine. Absolutely fine. You're not fine, said Marcus, her only real friend at the foundation, dropping into the chair across from her desk. You've been staring at that same spreadsheet for 20 minutes. I'm reviewing the numbers. Viv, it's upside down. She looked down. He was right. Okay, she admitted, rubbing her temples. Maybe I'm a little distracted. Marcus leaned forward, his dark eyes full of concern. I heard what happened. The champagne thing. He shook his head. Cordelia Hampton is a monster. Everyone knows it. Harrison knows it too. That's why he called an emergency board meeting yesterday. Vivian's head snapped up. What? You didn't hear? Rumor is he's furious. Threatened to cut Cordelia off from every charity event for the rest of the year. Marcus grinned. Apparently she cried for 3 hours straight. A small, petty part of Vivian felt satisfaction at that, but mostly she just felt tired. It doesn't matter, she said. I just want to forget it ever happened. Yeah, well, Marcus glanced toward the door. That might be difficult. Why? He nodded toward the hallway. Because Dominic Blackwell is standing outside your office. Vivian's heart stopped. She turned slowly, and there he was, framed in her doorway like some kind of GQ apparition. Dark suit, no tie, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked nervous. Dominic Blackwell? Nervous? I'll just go, Marcus said, practically sprinting out of the room. Traitor. Dominic stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The office suddenly felt very small. Ms. Sterling, he said formally. Mr. Blackwell. She kept her voice cool. I assume you're here to see your father. His office is on the 5th floor. I'm not here to see my father. Then I can't imagine what business you'd have with me. He was quiet for a moment, studying her with those impossible gray eyes. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Ivory-colored, elegant, just like the invitation that had started this nightmare. What is that? She asked suspiciously. An apology. He set it on her desk. From my mother and Cordelia. Vivian stared at the envelope like it might bite her. You're joking. I wish I were. A muscle ticked in his jaw. My father insisted. He was, let's say, displeased with their behavior. She didn't touch the envelope. And you? Did you come all the way down here just to deliver their forced apology? Dominic's expression flickered, something vulnerable breaking through the careful mask. No, he said quietly. I came to deliver my own. The words hung in the air between them. I should have stopped it, he continued, his voice rough. The moment Cordelia started in on you, I should have shut it down. Instead, I sat there like a coward and let them tear you apart. He met her eyes, and she saw genuine remorse there. I'm sorry, Vivian. You deserved better. Her name on his lips did something dangerous to her pulse. Why didn't you? She asked. Stop it, I mean. He laughed bitterly. Because I've spent 32 years keeping the peace, staying quiet. Not making waves. He shook his head. My mother has a way of making you feel like speaking up isn't worth the consequences. That sounds like a miserable way to live. It is. The honesty of it disarmed her. She'd expected arrogance, excuses, perhaps even blame. Not this raw admission of weakness. Why are you really here? She asked softly. Dominic took a step closer, then another. Until he was standing right in front of her desk, close enough that she could smell that sandalwood again, see the silver flecks in his eyes. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, he said. Because you walked into that mansion in a thrift store dress and faced down two of the cruelest women in Connecticut without flinching. Because when you looked at Cordelia and said she'd told you everything you needed to know. He exhaled slowly. I wanted to stand up and applaud. Vivian's breath caught. You're engaged. I know. To a woman who poured champagne on my head. I know. So whatever this is, she gestured between them. It can't happen. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're right, he said. It can't. But he didn't move. And neither did she. The air between them was thick, charged, impossible. Vivian could feel her resolve crumbling, and she hated herself for it. She'd sworn she'd never be the kind of woman who fell for unavailable men, for pretty words and smoldering looks. And yet, there's a fundraiser next week, Dominic said suddenly, for the children's literacy program, your program. I know. I organized it. My father wants you there. Front and center. He paused. And so do I. She should say no. Every rational thought in her brain screamed at her to say no. I'll think about it, she heard herself say instead. Dominic smiled. A real smile this time, one that transformed his entire face and made her stomach flip. That's all I ask. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. For what it's worth, he said, looking back at her. Cordelia was wrong about you. You're not a gold digger. His eyes held hers. You're the most genuine person I've ever met. And then he was gone. Vivian sat frozen for a full minute, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She looked at the envelope on her desk. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten card from Cordelia, the apology stiff and clearly forced. I sincerely regret any discomfort caused by the unfortunate accident. Vivian almost laughed. Unfortunate accident. Right. But beneath Cordelia's card was another note, this one on plain paper in a bold, masculine hand. She's wrong about one more thing. That dress wasn't $37. It was priceless. Vivian pressed her hand to her mouth. She was in so much trouble. The ballroom of the Blackwell Foundation was unrecognizable. Vivian stood at the entrance, momentarily stunned by her own creation. Thousands of fairy lights cascaded from the ceiling like frozen rain. Tables draped in midnight blue held centerpieces of white roses and flickering candles. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner, and children's artwork from the literacy program adorned every wall. Bright splashes of color and hope against the elegant backdrop. 6 months of planning. Countless sleepless nights. And it was perfect. You outdid yourself, Marcus whispered, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of sparkling water. Seriously, Viv, this is incredible. She smiled, but her eyes were already scanning the crowd. donors in designer gowns, board members in tailored suits, Harrison Blackwell holding court near the silent auction table. And there, by the bar, Dominic. He wore a midnight blue suit that matched the decor, as if he'd known. His eyes found hers across the room instantly, like magnets snapping together. He raised his glass slightly. A private toast. Vivienne looked away, her cheeks warming. It had been a week since his visit to her office, a week of avoiding his calls, ignoring the flowers he'd sent, white roses just like the centerpieces. Coincidence. And telling herself that whatever she felt was irrelevant. He was engaged. End of story. Incoming, Marcus muttered. Vivienne turned to find Harrison approaching, his face beaming with pride. "My dear girl," he said, clasping her hands, "this is magnificent. You've captured the heart of what we do here, giving children a voice through literacy." His eyes grew misty. "My late wife would have loved this. She believed in this program more than anything." "I know," Vivienne said softly. "I read her letters in the archives. She was an extraordinary woman." Harrison squeezed her hands. "So are you." He leaned closer. "I have an announcement to make tonight. I think you'll be pleased." Before she could ask what he meant, he was swept away by a group of donors. The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes, small talk, and silent auction bids. Vivienne was explaining the literacy curriculum to a potential donor when she felt a presence at her back, warm, solid, unmistakable. "Dance with me." Dominic's voice was low, meant only for her. "I'm working," she said without turning around. "You've been working all night, one dance. Your fiancé might object. Cordelia isn't here." There was something strange in his tone. "She's indisposed." Vivienne finally turned to face him. Up close, he looked tired, shadows under his eyes, tension in his jaw. But when he looked at her, something softened. "Please," he said quietly. "I need to talk to you." Against every instinct, she let him lead her to the dance floor. His hand settled on her lower back, warm through the silk of her emerald dress, a dress she'd spent far too much on, telling herself it was for the event, not for him. His other hand enveloped hers, and they began to move. "You're shaking," he observed. "I'm nervous." "Of me? Of this?" She met his eyes. "Of what happens if I stop pretending I don't feel something?" Dominic's breath caught. His hand tightened on her back. "Vivienne, don't." She shook her head. "Don't say something you can't take back, not while you're still wearing her ring on your conscience." "I ended it." The words hit her like a thunderclap. "What?" 3 days ago. His gray eyes were intense, burning. "I told Cordelia it was over, that I couldn't marry someone I didn't love." He pulled her slightly closer. "Someone I could never love. Not when I can't stop thinking about someone else." Vivienne's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could feel it. "Dominic, The music stopped. A sharp feedback whine cut through the ballroom as someone took the microphone on stage. Vivienne turned to see Genevieve Blackwell standing at the podium, her emerald silk gown matching Vivienne's dress almost exactly. Her smile was a razor blade. "Good evening, everyone," Genevieve said smoothly. "I apologize for interrupting, but I have an announcement that simply cannot wait." Harrison stepped forward, frowning. "Genevieve, this isn't... It's about our guest of honor." Genevieve's cold eyes found Vivienne in the crowd. "The woman my husband has been so eager to celebrate tonight." Vivienne's blood turned to ice. "I've done some research," Genevieve continued, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "And I've discovered some fascinating things about Ms. Vivienne Sterling." She pulled a folder from behind the podium. "For instance, did you know she was expelled from Columbia University? Not for financial reasons, as she claims, but for academic dishonesty?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. "That's not true," Vivienne whispered, but her voice wouldn't carry. "I have the documents right here." Genevieve held up the folder. falsified research, plagiarism. Our little charity case isn't just a gold digger. She's a fraud. The room erupted in murmurs. Vivian felt hundreds of eyes turning toward her, filled with suspicion, judgment, disgust. "That's a lie," she said, louder now, stepping forward. "I left Columbia because I couldn't afford tuition. I was never expelled, never accused of anything." "Then how do you explain these records?" Genevieve smiled triumphantly. "I obtained them directly from the university. They're forged." Vivian's voice shook with fury. "You fabricated them to destroy me. How dare you accuse me of—" "Enough!" The word cracked across the ballroom like a whip. Everyone turned to see Harrison Blackwell striding toward the stage, his face thunderous with rage. "Genevieve," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "put down that folder and step away from the microphone." "Harrison, I'm only trying to protect—" "I said enough." He climbed onto the stage and took the microphone from her hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disgraceful interruption. I assure you, the accusations against Ms. Sterling are completely false." He looked at his wife with an expression Vivian had never seen before. Cold, final, done. "And they will be dealt with privately." Genevieve's face went white. Harrison turned to the crowd, his voice warming. "Now, I believe I promised an announcement, one that fills me with great pride." He smiled at Vivian. "Tonight I am pleased to announce the creation of the Eleanor Blackwell Memorial Scholarship, named for my late wife, which will fully fund one exceptional young person's education each year." His eyes shone. "And its first recipient will be Vivian Sterling." The ballroom erupted in applause, but Vivian barely heard it, because Dominic was walking toward her through the crowd, his eyes never leaving hers, and when he reached her, he took her face in his hands and kissed her. Right there. In front of everyone, and Vivian kissed him back. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything. When Dominic finally pulled back, the ballroom was silent. 200 guests stood frozen, champagne glasses suspended midair, mouths hanging open. Somewhere near the bar, a glass shattered. Vivian stared up at Dominic, breathless, terrified, exhilarated. "You just kissed me in front of everyone." "I know. Your mother is going to kill you. Probably." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that made her knees weak. "Worth it." The silence broke like a dam. Applause erupted from one corner. Marcus, of course, whooping like he was at a football game. Others joined in, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Harrison was laughing, actually laughing, clapping his son on the shoulder. But not everyone was celebrating. Genevieve stood frozen on the stage, her face a mask of barely contained fury. She looked at Vivian with such pure hatred that it felt like a physical blow. Then she turned and walked out of the ballroom without a word. "That's not good," Vivian murmured. "Don't worry about her." Dominic took her hand. "She can't hurt you anymore." But Vivian knew better. Women like Genevieve Blackwell didn't surrender. They retreated and regrouped. This wasn't over. Still, for one night, she let herself believe it might be okay. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind. Vivian returned to Columbia to complete her degree, the Eleanor Blackwell Scholarship covering everything: tuition, books, even a small stipend for living expenses. She cried when she signed the paperwork. Her grandmother cried harder. "Your mother would be so proud," Dorothy said, squeezing her hand. "Both your parents would." Dominic was there through all of it. He helped her move into a small apartment near campus. He brought her coffee during late-night study sessions. He sat in the back of her first lecture hall, pretending to read a newspaper while actually watching her with ridiculous pride. "You're distracting," she told him afterward. "You're brilliant," he replied, and kissed her until she forgot what she'd been complaining about. It felt like a dream, the kind you're afraid to believe in, because waking up would hurt too much. And then Cordelia came back. Vivian was leaving the library when she saw her. Cordelia Hampton stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a white cashmere coat, looking like a vengeful snow queen. Her ice-blue eyes locked onto Vivian with laser precision. "We need to talk," she said. "I don't think we do." "It's about Dominic." Cordelia stepped closer. "About who he really is, what he's really capable of." Vivian's stomach tightened. "I'm not interested in your games." "This isn't a game." For once, Cordelia's voice held no malice, just something cold and flat. "I'm trying to warn you. Because believe it or not, I was you once." Against her better judgment, Vivian paused. "What are you talking about?" Cordelia smiled bitterly. "You think you're special? You think you're the first woman Dominic has rescued from his mother? The first project he's taken on?" She laughed. "I was a nobody too once, a marketing assistant at one of their companies. Dominic swept in, charmed me, made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. That's not—" "He proposed within 6 months," Cordelia continued. "And then his mother got to work, reshaping me, molding me into what she wanted. And Dominic let her." Her eyes hardened. "He always lets her. Because at the end of the day, he's too weak to stand up to her. He'll promise you the world, Vivian, and then he'll watch while Genevieve tears it away piece by piece." Vivian's hands were shaking. "You're lying." "Am I?" Cordelia tilted her head. "Ask him about his last girlfriend." "The one before me? Ask him what happened to her when Genevieve decided she wasn't suitable." She turned to leave, then paused. "I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because I wish someone had warned me." She walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. That night, Vivian couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Cordelia's words echoing in her mind. He always lets her. He's too weak to stand up to her. It couldn't be true. Dominic had defended her at the dinner. He'd ended his engagement. He'd kissed her in front of everyone. But had he actually confronted his mother? Had he demanded she apologize for the forged documents, the public humiliation? Or had Harrison done all of that while Dominic stood by and watched? Her phone buzzed. A text from Dominic. "Dinner tomorrow?" "I have a surprise." She typed back. "We need to talk first." His reply came immediately. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know," she wanted to say. "I don't know if any of this is real." Instead, she wrote, "I'll come to your apartment, 7 p.m. Dominic's penthouse was everything she'd expected. Sleek, modern, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. Abstract art hung on pristine white walls. It looked like a museum, not a home. He greeted her with a kiss, but she pulled back. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I talked to Cordelia today." His expression shuttered. "What did she say?" "She said you do this. Find women, rescue them, and then let your mother destroy them." Vivian's voice trembled. "She said you're too weak to protect anyone from Genevieve, that you always let her win." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "She's not entirely wrong." The words hit Vivian like a punch to the chest. "I spent my entire life trying to keep the peace," he continued, "telling myself that going along with my mother was easier than fighting her. And yes, I failed people because of it. I've let her run off women I cared about because I didn't have the courage to stop her." Vivian felt tears burning her eyes. "Then what makes me any different?" Dominic stepped closer, his gray eyes fierce. "Because you're the first person who's ever made me want to be brave." He took her hands in his. "I can't promise my mother will ever accept you. I can't promise it will be easy." His grip tightened. "But I can promise that I will fight for you. Every single day. I will stand up to her, stand up to anyone, because losing you—" His voice cracked. "Losing you is not an option." Vivian searched his face, looking for the lie, the weakness. She found only truth. "Prove it," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the only solid thing in his world. I will, he said against her hair. I swear to you, I will. The Blackwell family board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Vivian wasn't supposed to be there, but Dominic had asked her to come, and the look in his eyes, determined, vulnerable, resolute, told her this was the moment he'd promised, the moment he would prove it. She sat in the hallway outside the boardroom, her knee bouncing nervously. Through the heavy oak doors, she could hear muffled voices, Harrison's calm baritone, Genevieve's sharp soprano, and Dominic's steady tenor cutting through them both. Then Dominic's voice rose, clear and firm. I'm done, Mother. I'm done letting you control who I love, who I am, who I'm allowed to become. Vivian Sterling is the woman I want to spend my life with, and if you can't accept that, then you'll have to accept losing me instead. Silence. Then Genevieve's voice, cold as winter. You would choose that girl over your own family? No. Dominic's reply was immediate. I'm choosing to finally be family. The kind that supports each other. The kind that loves without conditions. A pause. The kind Mom would have wanted us to be. Vivian pressed her hand to her mouth. He'd invoked Eleanor, Genevieve's predecessor, Harrison's first wife, the woman whose memory Genevieve had always resented. More silence. Then Harrison spoke, his voice thick with emotion. He's right, Genevieve. Eleanor would be ashamed of what we've become, what I've allowed us to become. A heavy breath. It stops now. All of it. The schemes, the cruelty, the manipulation. Or I'll file for divorce by the end of the week. Vivian heard a chair scrape back. Footsteps. The door flew open, and Genevieve stormed out, her face pale with fury. She saw Vivian and stopped. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Genevieve spoke, her voice barely a whisper. You think you've won. I wasn't trying to win anything, Vivian said quietly. I was just trying to be seen. Something flickered in Genevieve's eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Then her mask slid back into place, and she walked away, her heels echoing down the marble corridor. Dominic appeared in the doorway. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, but he was smiling, really smiling. It's done, he said. Vivian stood. What happens now? He crossed to her in 3 steps and took her face in his hands. Now, he said, we live. 2 years later, the garden of Blackwell Mansion had been transformed. White chairs lined a flower-strewn aisle. An arch wrapped in roses and wisteria stood at the altar, catching the golden afternoon light. String musicians played softly as guests found their seats. Donors, board members, friends and family, all gathered to witness something nobody had expected. Dominic Blackwell was getting married, and not to Cordelia Hampton. In the bridal suite, Vivian stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Her dress was simple but elegant, ivory silk, vintage lace sleeves, a modest train. Her grandmother had sewn it herself, every stitch a wish for happiness, just like the old days. You look like an angel, Dorothy said, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Her ankle had healed perfectly, and she'd insisted on walking Vivian down the aisle herself. I look like I'm going to faint, Vivian replied, laughing nervously. A knock at the door. Marcus poked his head in, grinning. It's time. And fair warning, Dominic looks like he might actually cry. I've got $20 riding on it. Vivian took a deep breath, then another. This is real. This is actually happening. She took her grandmother's arm and walked out into the sunshine. The ceremony was perfect. Harrison officiated. He'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion, and his voice broke twice during the vows. Dominic did cry just a little when Vivian appeared at the end of the aisle. Marcus won his $20, but the moment Vivian would remember forever came during the ring exchange. Dominic slid a simple platinum band onto her finger and said, I spent my whole life in a mansion full of people and feeling completely alone. Then you walked in with your thrift store dress and your fire and your courage, and suddenly I understood what home was supposed to feel like. He squeezed her hands. You're my home, Vivian. today and every day after. She couldn't speak. She just kissed him, right there, before Harrison even said she could. Everyone cheered. The reception spilled across the mansion's grounds, fairy lights in the trees, champagne towers on every table, laughter rising into the evening air. Vivienne danced with Harrison, who whispered that Eleanor would have adored her. She danced with Marcus, who made her promise to name her firstborn after him. She even danced with Dorothy, the two of them swaying gently while the old woman cried happy tears onto her shoulder. And through it all, Dominic watched her. When she finally returned to him, breathless and glowing, he pulled her close. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, incredibly, impossibly happy." He kissed her forehead. "Good, because I have one more surprise." He led her inside the mansion, up the grand staircase, down a corridor she'd never explored. They stopped before a closed door. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." She turned the handle and stepped inside. It was a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a rolling ladder, velvet armchairs, and a fireplace. But that wasn't what stole her breath. The shelves were filled with children's books, thousands of them. Picture books, chapter books, young adult novels, every title imaginable, organized and labeled with care. "It's for the foundation," Dominic said. "A lending library for the literacy program. Kids can come here, borrow whatever they want, take them home." He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I wanted to build something that matters, something that would make you proud." Vivienne turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "You idiot," she whispered. "You absolute idiot." "I was already proud of you," he laughed, and she kissed him, and somewhere downstairs the band started playing their song. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the stars had come out, Vivienne stood on the balcony of the mansion, her mansion now, she supposed, and looked out over the gardens where everything had changed. Dominic appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She smiled. "I'm thinking about a girl who showed up here 2 years ago in a $37 dress, terrified she didn't belong. And now?" Vivienne took the champagne, clinked her glass against his, and looked up at the man she loved. "Now I know that belonging isn't about where you come from." She kissed him softly. "It's about who stands beside you." Dominic pulled her close, and they stood together in the moonlight, 2 people who'd found home in each other. And if Genevieve was watching from her window, sipping whiskey and scowling, well, that was her problem. Vivienne Sterling Blackwell had a happily ever after to live. D'après